The restaurant doors swung open at 3:48 in the morning, and the October cold followed her inside like a predator that had finally caught its prey. Nora Sinclair stumbled through those glass doors, and everything in Castellano's went absolutely still. The candlelit tables, the soft amber glow against the dark wood, the smell of garlic and red wine hanging in the air, all of it froze in that single moment when she collapsed against the host stand. She was 27 years old, but tonight she looked like a woman who had lived through decades of wreckage. Her live-in nanny uniform was torn at the shoulder, and dark blood, still wet, soaked through the white cotton fabric like spilled wine that would not wash out. One eye was swollen completely shut, the skin purple and grotesque, the kind of swelling that came from fists meeting bone with precision and fury. Around her throat, handprints bruised her neck like evidence carved directly into her skin, like a necklace of violence that proved what had been done to her in the darkness. Her pale hands shook as she gripped the edge of the stand. Sweat plastered her dark hair to her face. She was gasping, not quite crying, not quite breathing, somewhere in that terrible space between survival and surrender. In the back booth, the one that had belonged to him for 10 years, Nicholas Castellano looked up from his whiskey. Salt and pepper hair swept back from his temples. A face carved from marble and rage, the kind of face that men learned not to question. His suit was black, tailored, expensive in a way that made clear he did not think about the cost of things anymore. A silver ring caught the candlelight on his right hand, the hand he used to settle disputes that the law refused to touch. Enzo and Theo sat across from him, two men in dark suits, two men who had seen things that would break ordinary people into fragments. When they saw Nora, they exchanged a look. The kind of look that passed between men who recognized danger when it walked through a door bleeding. Nicholas rose slowly. Each movement was deliberate, controlled, the way a general surveyed a battlefield before the slaughter began. He crossed to her in 4 strides. The restaurant staff vanished. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. "Let me see," he said. His voice was low, steady, the kind of voice that came from a man who was never questioned. She tried to speak. Her throat produced only a wet cough, and more blood came with it. Her hand flew to her mouth, but it was too late. He knelt beside her without hesitation. His expensive suit, the kind that cost more than her annual salary, bent at the knees beside a woman who made $14 an hour caring for children who did not belong to her. With careful hands, careful in the way that men who hurt people learn to be careful, he lifted the torn edge of her nanny uniform. What he saw made his face drain of color entirely. Old scars layered beneath fresh wounds. Not random marks. Deliberate. Systematic. Cigarette burns pocked her left rib cage, small and precise like a pattern. Knife marks, thin white lines that had healed badly, running in every direction like a map of hell written on her skin. Bruises in various stages of healing, fresh purple ones, older yellow ones, some so old they were barely visible anymore. Years. This was years of abuse mapped across her ribs like a history of violence that the law had never stopped. Nicholas's jaw clenched so hard a muscle jumped beneath his cheekbone. His eyes, which were hard and grey like a storm, began to glisten. His hands, the hands that had built an empire from blood and silence, trembled against her skin. Enzo and Theo exchanged another look. A different look this time. Because in 15 years of working for Nicholas Castellano, they had never seen him like this. His hands had never shaken. His eyes had never glistened. He was a man who had learned to be unbreakable, and now he was breaking in real time. "Who did this?" Nicholas asked. His voice was barely controlled, like a rope pulled tight enough to snap. Nora tried to speak again. Her swollen eye made her world tilt sideways. The pain in her ribs made breathing feel like drowning on dry land. "Douglas," she whispered. "Douglas Hale. He found me. He always finds me." Nicholas's entire body went rigid. The name hung in the air like a curse word. Douglas Hale. A man with connections to corrupt police. A man who had been reported 5 times and arrested 0 times. A man whose obsession with Nora had metastasized into violence because she had said no, and some men could not accept the word no from a woman they had decided belonged to them. "How much time do you have?" Nicholas asked. 3 days, she whispered. He said if I don't bring him $35,000 in 3 days, he's going to take Emma. He's going to take her, and I will never see her again. Emma. 5 years old. With dark curls and a gap in her front teeth and a way of holding Nora's hand at bedtime like Nora was the only thing keeping her tethered to safety. Emma, who called her the only mother figure she had ever known. Nicholas rose to his feet. He turned to Enzo, and in that single look was the entire architecture of what was about to happen. What was about to unfold? What was about to shatter Douglas Hale into so many pieces that he would never be able to reassemble himself? But what Nicholas did not know, as he stood in that candlelit restaurant and made a choice that would pull a desperate woman into his world of federal crimes and underworld judgment, was that his own brother's betrayal had scarred him in ways that were about to be healed by saving someone else first. The restaurant door was still open. October wind blew across the floor, carrying the sound of sirens in the distance, carrying the smell of rain that was about to fall on Las Vegas. Before we continue, if this story is hitting you, drop a like right now. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. Because what's coming is something that will stay with you. Now, let us go back to the beginning. Let us rewind to where Nora's story truly started, to understand how a woman with $5 in her pocket, no job, and no way out, ended up bleeding on the floor of the most dangerous man in Las Vegas. 3 days earlier. The alarm on Nora's phone buzzed at 5:17 in the morning. She did not sleep past that time anymore. Sleep was a luxury she could no longer afford. Her eyes opened to the converted closet she called home, a space so small that if she stretched her arms, she could touch both walls. The room was airless. The window did not open. A single bare light bulb hung from the ceiling, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. She lay there for exactly 2 minutes, counting her heartbeats, because breathing was free and she needed to make sure she was still alive. The Langford house was silent. Sophie Langford, the woman who employed her, was still asleep in the master suite down the hallway. The master suite where the ceilings were 18 feet tall and the windows overlooked the Las Vegas Strip. Nora's room was basically a closet. Literally. It had been a linen closet before Sophie had decided to convert it into a nanny's quarters. Nora rose and dressed in the dark, because turning on the light meant using electricity that Sophie would dock from her paycheck. Her clothes were folded on a single shelf, for nanny uniforms, all white, all stained with things that would not wash out. She pulled on the least stained one. Her wallet sat on the small shelf beside her bed. She opened it with the care of someone handling a dying animal. Inside were $5. 5. That was all that remained from her last paycheck, which had been 3 weeks ago. Sophie had accused her of stealing a cashmere scarf. She had not stolen it, but the accusation had cost her that paycheck, and the paycheck before that had been late, and the one before that had been reduced because Sophie claimed Emma had broken a lamp, and Sophie blamed Nora even though Emma had admitted she did it. $5. Enough for coffee from the gas station on the corner if she did not eat lunch. Not enough for both. Downstairs, in the kitchen that was larger than most people's living rooms, Nora made Emma breakfast. Scrambled eggs. Toast. Orange juice in a plastic cup because Sophie had rules about what dishes the nanny could use. Emma sat at the breakfast table, swinging her legs back and forth, humming a song she had learned in preschool. Nora? Emma asked, not looking up from her eggs. Yes, baby. Why does Mommy look angry when Daddy looks at you? Nora's heart stopped. She set down the pan carefully, because if she moved too quickly, she might shatter. Your mommy is not angry, Nora said quietly. She's just very busy. She says you are trying to steal her husband. But you don't have any bags to steal him with. 5 years old. Understanding the world in the way that children do, with devastating literal honesty. Nora knelt down and pulled Emma into her arms. The little girl smelled like shampoo and safety. Nora had been Emma's nanny for 2 years, had read her bedtime stories every night, had braided her hair every morning, had been the person Emma ran to when she had nightmares. "I love you," Nora whispered. "Do you know that?" "I love you too," Emma said simply. "You're my Nora." The front door slammed. Robert Langford, Sophie's husband, entered through the foyer. He was wearing his suit for work, his briefcase swinging at his side. He was handsome in the way that wealthy men are handsome, in the way that money makes everything look better. "Good morning," he said to Nora, and something flickered across his face. The very thing that Sophie had been noticing for months. The very reason Nora had been slowly losing hours, losing pay, losing her footing in a world that had very few places for women like her to stand. Sophie appeared at the top of the stairs like she had been waiting for this exact moment. Her face was cold. "Emma, finish your breakfast," Sophie said, not to Emma but at Nora. "And Nora, the Hendersons called. They're no longer interested in your nanny services. They said you were not a good fit for their family." Nora said nothing. She had already lost 4 families in the past 6 months, each one withdrawing their employment right after Sophie had mentioned something small, that Nora was unreliable, that she had broken something, that she seemed sad all the time. Sophie was systematically destroying her. Professionally. Socially. Piece by piece. "You'll need to find another position by the end of the month," Sophie continued. "I've decided I no longer need your services after that. Emma can attend day care. It will be much cleaner for everyone." Nora stood very still. The kitchen smelled like eggs and butter and the expensive coffee that Sophie drank from imported cups. Emma looked up from her breakfast, sensing the shift in the air the way children do. "When is Nora leaving?" Emma asked. "Never mind," Sophie said. "Finish." But Nora knew the clock was running. She had 30 days. By the end of this month, she would be without employment, without reference, without anything except the $5 in her wallet and nowhere to go. She did not know that in 72 hours, the choice she had made years ago to say no to Douglas Hale would come back to destroy everything she had built, and that a man in a candlelit restaurant would be the only person in the world who could save her. But that was still 3 days away. For now, she was simply invisible. Disappearing. Already forgotten. The marble kitchen of the Langford mansion gleamed under recessed lighting at 7 in the morning. Everything was white. Everything was cold. Nora Sinclair stood at the stove, scrambled eggs hissing in a copper pan, Emma's breakfast plate already warming on the counter. 7 years old, blonde curls, still wearing her pink pajamas with the little rabbits on them. Emma sat at the kitchen table, swinging her feet, humming something she had learned at school. Nora loved Emma the way you love something you know you will have to give back. The sound of heels on marble tile stopped everything. Sophie Langford descended the stairs like a blade wrapped in silk. 42 years old but looking expensive in the way only money could buy. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves to her shoulders. 3 diamond bracelets caught the morning light on her left wrist alone. She wore a white cashmere sweater that probably cost what Nora made in 3 months. Her face was sharp. Her eyes were sharper. "Emma's breakfast is late," Sophie said. Her voice was clipped. Precise. The kind of voice that had never been questioned. "It's 7:02, Mrs. Langford," Nora said quietly. "I served at 7 o'clock. Sophie's eyes narrowed. "Don't contradict me." The words landed like a closed fist. Nora did not respond. She had learned that responses only made things worse. She slid the eggs onto the plate, added toast, fresh fruit arranged like a photograph. Emma watched the transaction between the 2 women the way children do, sensing the shift in the air, the invisible tension that had nothing to do with breakfast. Sophie settled into the chair across from Emma, reaching over to smooth her daughter's hair, a gesture performative and cold. Her gaze drifted toward the hallway where Richard Langford was leaving for work. 51 years old, grey at the temples, the kind of handsome that came with a corner office and quarterly bonuses. He was reaching for his car keys when he glanced back into the kitchen. "Good morning, Em," he said to his daughter. Then his eyes touched Nora. Just for a second. Thank you for making breakfast. Sophie's jaw tightened so imperceptibly that only someone watching her would notice it. But Nora was always watching her. You learned to watch people who held your future in their hands like loose change. The door closed. Richard left. The marble kitchen stretched into silence. Sophie cut Emma's eggs into small pieces, her movements sharp, deliberate. Eat, she said. Emma ate. Sophie turned her attention to Nora, standing with her hands clasped in front of her apron. I'm having lunch with the Henderson's wife today. They've been asking about you. Nora's stomach tightened. I told her you were wonderful with Emma, Sophie continued, her voice sweet as poison. But I also mentioned that we've had some concerns about reliability. About whether you're really the right fit for a family environment. Sophie smiled, and it was the smile of a woman who had decided someone's fate. They said they'd look for someone else. That was for families in 6 months. For positions, for withdrawals, for doors closing one by one because Sophie Langford had whispered the right things in the right ears. Nora did not remember walking to her room. Her room. That's what she called the converted closet off the kitchen, barely 6 feet wide, with a single twin bed pushed against the wall and a small dresser that had seen better decades. The only window looked into the pantry. She had lived there for 2 years. The rent was 0 because she worked 14-hour days, every day, 6 in the morning until 8 at night. Sometimes later if Sophie wanted her to wait while she went to an event, standing in the kitchen, heating leftovers, waiting to be dismissed. Her phone vibrated. Text message from an unknown number. But it wasn't unknown. She knew exactly who it was. Douglas Hale. I know you're at the Langfords. 3 days, Nora. $35,000 or I'm coming for you. You know I will. The phone fell from her hands. It landed on the small rug beside her bed, face up, the message still glowing. 3 days. $35,000. She had $5 in her wallet. A crumpled $5 bill that she had found on the floor of a grocery store 2 weeks ago. Everything else had gone to Douglas in the last 3 months. $500 here, $200 there, whatever she could scrape together from the cash tips she made on the rare occasion Sophie let her run errands and accept payment directly from neighbors who hired her to pick things up or watch their kids for an afternoon. It was all gone. Paid to a man who had become obsessed with her years ago, before she ran, before she changed her name, before she thought she had disappeared. Before his hands found her again. She sat on the edge of her bed. The mattress sagged in the middle. The walls were so thin she could hear the refrigerator in the kitchen through them. She could hear Emma asking Sophie something. Emma's voice was small. Sophie's answer was sharp. Nora opened the small drawer of her nightstand and took out a photograph. Worn at the edges, faded from being held too many times. It showed a man with kind eyes and a crooked smile, his arm around a woman who was looking at him like he was the only thing that mattered. That woman was her, but younger, before the fear. Before Douglas. Before any of this. The man was her husband, Marcus. He had been dead for 4 years now. Heart attack. 28 years old. Gone in an instant, and she had spent every day since trying to survive on the wreckage he left behind. She pressed the photograph against her chest and did not cry. Her tears had dried up somewhere on a Greyhound bus, 3 months ago, when she had run from Douglas the last time. The next afternoon, Nora pushed open the door of Prestige Pawn and Loan, a small storefront wedged between a laundromat and a closed restaurant. The October wind had cut through the air all morning, turning everything sharp and brittle. Dead leaves skittered across the sidewalk like they were trying to escape something. Her thin coat, the only coat she owned, black, purchased 3 years ago, was not nearly warm enough. Her breath came out in small white clouds. The pawn shop smelled like old metal and other people's broken lives. Shelves lined the walls, crowded with guitars, jewelry boxes, television sets, things that people had once loved and now needed to turn into money. The man behind the counter was maybe 60, with thick glasses and the kind of permanent exhaustion that comes from seeing the same transaction over and over again. Desperation, usually. Sometimes desperation that had nowhere else to go. Nora placed her late husband's watch on the glass counter between them. It was gold, not real gold but gold-colored, with a leather band that was still soft to the touch. Marcus had worn it every day. When she held it, she could almost feel his wrist underneath it. "How much?" she asked. The man picked it up, examined it without emotion, set it back down. 200. I need 35,000. He looked at her for the first time, his eyes magnified behind his glasses. Then he laughed. Not meanly. Just the laugh of someone who had heard impossible requests before. "Then you need a lottery ticket, sweetheart, not a pawn shop." She took the watch back and left the $200 on the counter. He called after her, but she was already at the door. The October wind tore through the parking lot like a blade wrapped in ice. She walked without direction, just away. Away from the shop, away from the Langford mansion that was waiting for her, away from the phone in her pocket that was probably already buzzing with another message from Douglas. 72 hours. $5 in her wallet. Everything else disappearing, piece by piece, like she was being erased from the world. What Nora did not know was that at that exact moment, Sophie Langford was sitting in a corner booth at an upscale coffee shop 3 miles away, drinking an espresso that cost more than Nora's weekly food budget. Across from her was the owner of an agency that placed nannies with elite families. Sophie had called her that morning specifically. "I need you to blacklist someone," Sophie had said, her voice sweet and casual, the way you might ask for a sugar for your coffee. "Her name is Nora Sinclair. She's been with us, and we've discovered she's a compulsive liar. Small thefts. Inappropriate behavior with staff. All lies. Every word." But the agency owner was writing it down. Sophie had been a client for 12 years. She had placed 5 nannies through this agency. She had referred her friends. She had left 5-star reviews online. Sophie Langford was not the kind of woman you questioned. "I'd hate to see her employed by someone else and have the same issues emerge," Sophie continued. "I'm sure you understand." The agency owner understood perfectly. By the end of that lunch, Nora Sinclair had been flagged in every major nanny database in Las Vegas. No family would hire her. No agency would recommend her. She was about to lose not just her job but her entire career in a single afternoon, and she was still walking through October wind with a dead man's watch in her pocket, unaware that the walls were closing in from every direction at once. The city was about to change her life in ways she could not yet imagine. The October wind cut through the parking garage like a blade wrapped in ice. Nora Sinclair sat in the driver's seat of her 1998 Honda Civic, hands gripping the steering wheel at 10 and 2, her knuckles white. The check engine light had been glowing for 6 months. Now the entire engine was silent. She turned the key again. Click. Click. Nothing. The clock on the dashboard read 11:33 p.m. She had told Emma she would be home by 11. The little girl slept in the room next to the kitchen, in the converted closet that Sophie Langford called Nora's quarters. Emma was 6 years old. She still had nightmares about her parents fighting. She needed to hear Nora's voice before sleep, needed to know someone was there, someone who would not leave. Nora's phone showed 2% battery. 2% and no signal in this stretch of Highway 95, nothing but desert rolling away into darkness on both sides of the asphalt. She had spent the last 3 hours in a loan shark's office on Fremont Street, sitting across from a man named Victor who had laughed when she asked for $35,000. "You got what? 5 days?" Victor had smiled like a shark. "Girl, that's not a timeline. That's a suicide note." She had left with nothing. Now her car was dying and she had nowhere to go except back to a house where Sophie Langford was waiting with poison in her eyes, and a job that was already crumbling like paper in water. The truth was simpler and more terrible than Sophie would ever know. There was no affair. There was no inappropriate behavior. There was only a woman so desperate that she had stayed in the Langford house for almost 2 years, pouring every ounce of her existence into a child who was not hers, because the alternative was the streets. The alternative was Douglas. Nora pulled her coat tighter. The heat in the car had died along with the engine. Cold crept in through the vents like something alive, something hunting. She tried the ignition one more time, knowing it would not turn over, knowing that knowing would not change anything. The sound of approaching engines came first. Not one car. Multiple engines, moving together, coordinated. Nora lifted her head. 3 black SUVs appeared through the darkness like sharks surfacing. Their windows were tinted so dark you could not see inside, could not see if anyone was looking back at you. The first SUV slowed as it passed her disabled Civic. The second did the same. The third pulled in front of her and stopped. The engines cut out. Silence fell on the highway like a hand clamped over a mouth. Car doors opened in sequence. Men emerged wearing dark suits that cost more than everything Nora owned combined. The first man was in his late 30s with a scar running along his jaw like a signature. He approached her window with the careful, measured steps of someone trained in violence. "You need help, miss?" His voice was neither kind nor unkind. It was professional. A tool being used. Nora's heart hammered against her ribs. Her mouth was dry. She rolled down the window 3 inches, just enough to speak. "My car won't start. I can walk. It's midnight. You can't walk out here." From the center SUV, another figure emerged. Taller. Broader. The way he moved was different from the scar-jawed man. This man moved like someone accustomed to being obeyed. He wore a black overcoat that hung to his knees, tailored to a body that was all muscle and consequence. His dark hair was swept back from a face that looked carved from stone. His eyes were the color of a winter sky. He approached the Civic without speaking. Nora could not look away. He studied her for 10 seconds. 20. The cold had made her eye twitch. One of her cheeks was bruised from Douglas's fist 3 weeks ago, the color fading to yellow-green. She was wearing a waitress uniform under her coat, the fabric stained with coffee and time. "Enzo," he said. His voice was like thunder recorded at a distance, deep and solid like an oath. "Get her car towed to Marco's shop. Theo, take her where she needs to go." "I can't pay you," Nora said through the cracked window. Her voice came out small, fragile. "I don't have money." The man, who was clearly someone important, someone used to being listened to, did not respond immediately. He looked at her broken car. At her terrified face framed by the window. At the way her hands trembled on the steering wheel. "No charge," he said. She should have refused. Every survival instinct honed by 27 years of disappointment should have told her to walk. Instead, she opened the car door. Enzo helped her out, his grip on her elbow surprisingly gentle. The dark-haired man was already walking back to the center SUV. He held the rear door open for her. She climbed in. The interior of the SUV was nothing like her car. Leather seats. Heating that turned the air warm. A small bar with bottles she recognized from magazine photos. The man sat across from her, not beside her. Distance maintained. A boundary set. In the front seat, a second man turned slightly. Theo. Also in his 30s. Also wearing a suit that belonged in a museum about wealth. "Where to?" Theo asked, his eyes finding her in the rearview mirror. She gave the Langford address. It emerged from her mouth like a confession. "I know that house," the dark-haired man said. "Old money. Family been there since the 70s. Nora did not answer. "What's your name?" "Nora Sinclair." She clutched at her pocket, at the small photograph she kept there. A man's face. Younger than the face across from her, softer, kind. Her husband. Dead 3 years. Sometimes she took it out just to remember what safety felt like. "Nicholas Castellano," he said. He did not offer his hand. "How did your car end up on that stretch of road at midnight, Nora Sinclair?" She could have lied. The words formed themselves in her throat, familiar and automatic. But something about the way he watched her made lying seem pointless. "Meeting that didn't go well," she said. "A loan shark." It was not a question. "How did you?" "Because I know Victor. Been running the same operation for 12 years. Only asks for that kind of money when someone's in trouble that money won't fix." He shifted slightly. "You in trouble that money won't fix." The SUV pulled onto the road. The desert fell away. Las Vegas appeared ahead like a constellation someone had dropped into the darkness, all those lights pulsing and burning and promising things nobody could keep. "Yes," Nora said. 3 miles behind them, headlights blinked once. A separate car, moving parallel to the convoy but not part of it. Inside that car, Douglas Hale sat with his hands clenched on the steering wheel, watching the SUV carrying his property move deeper into the city. His smile was not a smile. It was the expression of a predator calculating angles. The convoy moved through the Las Vegas night, carrying her toward something neither of them could yet see. Toward a choice that would remake her world. Toward a man who had learned that sometimes the only way to save yourself is to save someone else first. Toward 35,000 reasons to be afraid, and one 6-year-old girl sleeping in a converted closet, waiting for her to come home and whisper, "I'm here, Emma. I'm still here." But Nora did not know that the Langford mansion was already dark except for the foyer lights. She did not know that Sophie Langford had received a message at 11:15 p.m., a message from Douglas Hale that said, "Tell me where she goes and I'll make sure you never see her again." She did not know that Sophie had answered him. She did not know any of it. The SUV turned onto the street where the Langford mansion sat behind its black iron gates, and Nicholas Castellano studied her profile and thought of his brother Carlo, beaten and silent, and of all the people he had not saved because saving them seemed impossible. 5 in the morning, and the world was still dark. October cold pressed against the windows of the safe apartment above Castellano's, leaving them weeping with condensation. Nora Sinclair sat on the edge of the bed in that small, warm room, and her hands would not stop shaking. She had been running for so long. So very long. The apartment was sparse, clean lines, soft grey walls, a single lamp casting everything in amber. Someone had thought of everything. Fresh clothes in the closet. Toiletries in the bathroom. A bottle of water on the nightstand, still beaded with cold. But all she could do was sit there, trembling like a candle in the wind, and stare at the photograph in her lap. Marcus. Her husband. Dead 3 years from cancer, his face frozen at 42, smiling at a beach that neither of them would ever see together again. She touched his cheek with her thumb, a gesture so worn it had become muscle memory. "I'm so tired," she whispered to his face in the darkness. "I've been running for so long. I don't know if I can keep doing this." The photograph did not answer. It never did. She stood up, moved to the window, and looked down at the street for stories below. The pavement was empty except for a single streetlight casting a pool of yellow against the black asphalt. Her fingers traced the cold glass of the window pane. The latch was right there. So easy. Just open it. Just step forward. Just stop fighting. 1 moment, that's all it would take. Then she heard it. A child's laugh from somewhere below, from the restaurant kitchen, she realized. A worker's daughter, playing before the morning shift began. The sound was bright and unguarded, full of the kind of joy that belongs only to people who have never known loss. Emma's age. That girl downstairs was Emma's age. She could see Emma's small face as clearly as if the child were standing in front of her. The way Emma's eyes crinkled when she smiled. The way her voice sounded when she whispered, "I love you, Nora Bear." Those small arms wrapped around Nora's neck like she was the only solid thing in a world that kept shifting and breaking. Nora's hand fell away from the window latch. She stepped back. Away from the edge. Away from the answer that would be too quick, too easy, too final. Douglas Hale would not get that victory. Would not get the satisfaction of her surrender. Would not get to tell Emma that Nora had left because she wanted to, because she was too weak to stay. She was not weak. She sat back on the bed, the photograph clutched to her chest, and waited for morning to arrive with whatever it was carrying. Down in the kitchen of the Langford mansion, Emma woke to silence. Her small bedroom was still dark, the alarm clock reading 6:22 a.m. She had been sleeping in Nora's converted closet room since the night of the restaurant, Nicholas's men having quietly arranged for the child to be removed from Sophie Langford's reach while her mother slept. Emma's stuffed rabbit, worn grey with love, sat on the pillow next to her. She clutched it and padded downstairs in her bare feet, her nightgown dragging on the marble steps. Sophie's voice cut through the darkness like a blade. "Get back upstairs." Emma froze. Her mother stood in the kitchen in her silk robe, phone pressed to her ear, her face twisted with something Emma had never seen before. Not anger. Something worse. Hunger. "I told you, she went to Castellano's restaurant," Sophie hissed into the phone. "Yes, I'm certain. If you move fast enough, you could. Yes, I understand the risks." A pause. "Then, I don't care what happens to her. Just make sure she's gone." Emma's small hand tightened on her rabbit. Sophie ended the call and noticed the child for the first time. Her expression shifted immediately into something sweet and false, like a light switch flipped. "Emma, baby. Why are you up so early? Where's Nora?" Emma's voice was small, uncertain. Sophie smiled. It did not reach her eyes. "Nora doesn't work here anymore, sweetheart. She left. She abandoned you." The words landed like stones in still water. Emma's face crumpled. "She wouldn't leave me. She wouldn't." "Oh, but she did," Sophie said, moving toward her daughter. "She packed her bag in the middle of the night and ran away. Just like everyone always does. We can't trust anyone, Emma. Everyone leaves eventually. Even people who say they love you." Emma started crying, not the big dramatic tears of a tantrum, but the small, broken sobs of a child whose faith in the world had just cracked. Sophie did not comfort her. Instead, she turned back to her coffee and smiled into her cup, thinking of the money Douglas had promised her. $50,000 to help him find Nora. $50,000 to destroy the girl who had the audacity to receive affection from Richard Langford. Sophie Langford had wanted to be loved her entire life and had never learned that love could not be purchased, stolen, or manufactured through cruelty. So she had built something instead. A life of perfect surfaces and hollow interiors. And when she felt that hollowness starting to echo back at her, she blamed the people around her for not filling it. 3 miles away, in a car moving through the pre-dawn streets of Las Vegas, Douglas Hale gripped his steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His hands were shaking. His breath came in short, sharp bursts through his nose. She had run. Again. After everything he had done for her, after everything he had offered, she had run straight into the protection of a criminal. A man who dealt in death and blood and favors owed in the dark. Douglas had loved her. He had done everything right. He had shown up. He had paid for things. He had made it clear that she belonged to him. And she had chosen someone else. The rage in his chest felt like it might consume him from the inside out. Like fire spreading through his veins, burning everything it touched. At 7 a.m. exactly, Douglas Hale pulled up to the Langford mansion with 2 men in the passenger and back seats. Officers Brennan and Cruz. Men whose paychecks came from the Las Vegas Police Department but whose loyalty came from the envelopes Douglas slipped into their hands every month. Sophie let them in through the back door, smiling like a conspirator, because that's what she was. "Where is she?" Douglas demanded, his voice sharp as broken glass. "I don't know exactly," Sophie said, "but I know she went to Castellano's restaurant. That's where the Mafia boss had her taken." Douglas's eyes lit up with something that might have been fire or might have been madness. Then that's where we're going. He turned toward the stairs. Get the girl. We're taking her. Emma stood frozen on the landing, her rabbit pressed against her chest. She had heard everything. Every word had carved itself into her small heart like graffiti on a wall. Sophie grabbed her arm. Come on, baby. We're going for a drive. Emma wrenched away and ran. Through the kitchen, toward the back door, into the morning that was beginning to pale toward grey. But Officer Brennan caught her easily, lifting the 6-year-old child like she weighed nothing, and Emma screamed, a sound so pure and desperate that it echoed across the manicured lawn and disappeared into the empty air. By 7:45 a.m., the three men were standing outside Castellano's restaurant, which remained dark and locked, the neon sign in the window turned off like a dead eye. Douglas pounded on the door. Enzo opened it. 42 years old, built like a wall, with scars on his knuckles that told stories no one wanted to hear. He looked at the three men standing on the sidewalk and did not move to let them inside. Restaurants closed, Enzo said, his voice flat and final as a headstone. We're looking for Nora Sinclair, Officer Brennan said, flashing a badge that gleamed in the morning light. We have a warrant. It was a lie. There was no warrant. But Enzo did not move. Behind him, the restaurant opened into shadow and silence. The kind of silence that exists in places where bad things have happened or are about to happen. Nicholas Castellano emerged from that darkness like something that had been waiting there all along. He was dressed simply, dark pants, a black shirt open at the collar, revealing the gold chain that caught the early light. His hair was dark, silver threading through at the temples, and his eyes held the quality of something that had been burned in a very hot fire and come out harder on the other side. There was a scar running from his left eye down to his cheekbone, pale and thin like a thread sewn through his skin. Theo stood at his shoulder, 20 years younger, all muscle and readiness. Nicholas did not acknowledge the three men at first. Instead, he surveyed them the way a general surveys a battlefield, calculating angles, weighing possibilities. When he finally spoke, his voice was deep and solid like an oath. You are not welcome here. This restaurant is private property. You have 5 seconds to leave it. Douglas stepped forward, his hands clenching into fists. I don't think you understand who you're talking to. I'm taking Nora Sinclair with me whether you like it or not. She's my girlfriend. She stole from me. Nicholas did not blink. She is not your anything. And you're not getting her. The morning air between them went very still. Douglas pulled a gun from his waistband. His hand was trembling, but his aim was steady. I think you need to reconsider. I don't think you understand, Nicholas said quietly. I'm not the one you should be afraid of right now. The black SUVs emerged from 3 different directions simultaneously. 12 men in tactical gear, weapons visible, moving with the precision of people who had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in their heads and only once in reality. But these were not Nicholas's men. These were federal agents. Special Agent Sarah Chen stepped out of the lead vehicle, 40 years old, sharp eyes, bulletproof vest with FBI emblazoned across the front in white letters. She moved toward Douglas Hale with the absolute certainty of someone holding all the cards. Douglas Hale, she said, her voice cutting through the morning like a knife, you are under arrest for stalking, assault, attempted murder, blackmail, and conspiracy to commit violence. Officers Brennan and Cruz, you're also under arrest for corruption, abuse of authority, and aiding and abetting a stalker. The gun fell from Douglas's hand. It clattered on the pavement with a sound that echoed like a period at the end of a sentence. You can't, Douglas whispered. You can't do this. I have friends. I have? Had friends, Sarah Chen said. Her voice was not unkind, but it was certain. Both officers flipped on you 2 hours ago. We've been building this case for 6 months, Mr. Hale. We have phone records, text messages, testimony from people you thought were loyal. We have everything. The handcuffs came out. Cold metal clicking around wrists. Douglas's face was the color of old paper, all the blood draining away, leaving him hollow and pale and terrified. He fell to his knees on the pavement, trembling like a cornered animal, begging, "Please, I didn't mean, she's lying, I never, please." No one answered. His words fell into the empty morning and disappeared. News vans were already pulling up. Cameras emerging. Within minutes, Douglas Hale's face would be plastered across every television screen in Las Vegas. The man who tried to hunt down a woman. The man who used corrupt cops as weapons. The man brought down by a Mafia boss's single phone call to a federal agent. Federal prison. 40 years minimum. No parole. No mercy. Just a cage and time stretching out like an ocean with no shore. Sometimes that is justice. Not death, which is too quick and too merciful. But life. Long, slow life, locked away, knowing that the woman he tried to destroy walked free. At 9:27 a.m., FBI agents pulled up to the Langford mansion. They had a warrant this time, a real one, signed by a judge, authorizing them to enter and search and arrest. Sophie answered the door in her silk robe, her hair perfectly arranged, her makeup flawless. She was smiling. "Can I help you, officers?" she said, her voice the voice of a woman who had never been told no in her entire life. "Sophie Langford, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit assault, aiding and abetting a stalker, and obstruction of justice," Agent Chen said. She had not changed out of her tactical gear. Some people did not need costume changes to inspire fear. Sophie's smile did not falter immediately. "That's absurd. I'm a respected member of this community. I chair 3 charity boards." "We have your phone records," Chen interrupted. 14 calls to Douglas Hale in 3 days. Text messages detailing Nora Sinclair's location. A recorded conversation where you agreed to help him kidnap a child in exchange for $50,000. The smile froze on Sophie's face. Richard Langford appeared at the top of the stairs, his face pale as bone. "Sophie? What did you do?" The handcuffs came out. Cold metal clicking. Sophie's perfect composure shattered like glass struck by a hammer. No, you don't understand, I was just, Richard, I was just." She was crying now, her mascara running in black rivers down her face, her silk robe torn at the sleeve as the agents guided her toward the door. Emma watched from the living room. Watched her mother led past the cameras that had assembled on the lawn. Watched the headlines form in real time, "Wealthy socialite helped violent stalker hunt innocent nanny. Charity board chair arrested in kidnapping conspiracy." By afternoon, Sophie's charity boards had issued statements distancing themselves from her. By evening, her friends had stopped taking her calls. By midnight, the news cycles had moved on to the next scandal, but Sophie Langford's name was burned into the public consciousness like a scar. 20 years federal prison. Financial assets frozen pending trial. Bail denied due to the risk of flight. The careful empire she had built, reputation, social standing, strategic friendships, dismantled in a single morning. Systematic destruction. The only kind of justice that lasts. And what Nora Sinclair did not know, still sitting in that safe apartment above the restaurant, was that Nicholas Castellano had been working with the FBI for months. That he had fed them information about corrupt cops and rotten systems. That when he learned about Douglas Hale and Sophie Langford, he had simply made a phone call to a woman named Sarah Jen and let justice do the work that mercy could not. 3 weeks had passed since the morning the federal agents came. 3 weeks of Nora Sinclair learning how to exist in a world where silence no longer meant danger. The safe apartment above Castellano's restaurant held late autumn light through tall windows that overlooked the Las Vegas Strip. Outside, the city hummed its endless appetite. Inside, there was only quiet. Her bruises had faded from purple-black to yellow-green. The swelling around her left eye had receded enough that she could see clearly again. Small mercies. She wore a borrowed sweater, cream-colored cashmere worth more than 3 months of her former nanny salary, and she sat on the edge of the couch because she still did not feel entitled to full comfort. Nicholas Castellano came every evening at 6 o'clock. He came with food from restaurants whose names she recognized from glossy magazines. He set the containers on the marble counter and asked, "How are you?" in that voice of his, deep and solid like an oath, and she learned to answer honestly instead of the automatic "fine" that had been her armor for so long. "Tell me about your brother," she asked one evening in early November, the sky outside turning that particular shade of blue that comes only in desert autumn. Nicholas set down his wine glass. "Carlo," he said, and the name carried the weight of old sorrow. "He was 4 years younger than me. Reckless. He married Maria thinking he could change her. Thinking love was enough to cure whatever broken thing lived inside her chest. What happened to him? Car accident. Drunk driver. Carlo was walking home from a bar at 2 in the morning because Maria had locked him out." Nicholas paused. "The driver survived. Carlo didn't. He left behind a 6-year-old boy and a woman who had never learned how to be kind." Nora understood then what she had sensed in Nicholas from the beginning. He was a man built from loss. Just as she was. Two people who had learned that the world took and sometimes forgot to give back. "Leo is with you now," Nora said. "For 3 months. I've had him living with me while Maria." He stopped. "While we figure things out." The next afternoon, Nicholas came early. The sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the apartment. He stood in the doorway with a small boy beside him, hand in hand. The boy was perhaps 6, with dark hair and eyes that matched Nicholas's exactly, the same storm grey that seemed to hold centuries of secrets. "Leo," Nicholas said, "this is Nora. She's a friend." The boy stared at her with the careful assessment of a child who has learned not to trust easily. Nora kneeled to his level, her joints protesting, her body still remembering pain. "Hi, Leo," she said, and did not smile too broadly, did not reach out with false warmth. "I'm Nora." "You're the lady Dad talks about," Leo said, his voice small and precise. Nora's eyes met Nicholas's for just a moment. "I am," she said. They spent the afternoon in the way that time moves differently for children. An hour became several. Nora read to Leo from a picture book about a mouse and a forest. She showed him how to build towers from stacking cups that tumbled down. They played a game where they pretended different chairs were different countries and you had to cross the ocean without touching the floor. Leo laughed, a sound like a bell, and Nora felt something in her chest that had been locked tight begin to loosen. Nicholas watched from the kitchen counter, and something in his granite face had softened. His men, stationed outside, would later tell Theo that they had seen their boss smile, truly smile, for the first time in months. As evening collapsed into dusk and Nicholas prepared to take Leo back to his apartment, the boy tugged on Nicholas's sleeve. His touch was uncertain, as if he was not sure he was allowed to ask for things. "Dad," Leo said, "my arm hurts." Nicholas frowned. "Where?" "Just here." Leo gestured vaguely at his left side. Nicholas kneeled down, automatically, the way fathers do. "Can you show me, buddy?" Leo hesitated. His eyes moved to Nora, then back to Nicholas. Slowly, he lifted his shirt. The room stopped breathing. Bruises covered his ribs in a constellation of violence. Some faded to sickly yellow, weeks old. Others bloomed purple-black across his small bones, fresh enough that they still carried their full viciousness. The pattern spoke its own language. This was not one incident. This was systematic. This was deliberate. Nicholas's hands went absolutely still. "Leo," he said, and his voice had become something fragile, something dangerous in its fragility. "Who did this?" Leo's eyes filled with tears. His bottom lip trembled. "Aunt Maria," he whispered. "She said I deserved it when I was bad. She said not to tell you because you'd send me away." The words landed like bullets. Nicholas's breath came short. He lifted Leo into his arms, pulling the boy against his chest, and for the first time in the 3 weeks Nora had known him, Nicholas Castellano completely broke. The tears came without sound. Silent, total, devastation wearing a human face. His broad shoulders shook. His hands, capable of ordering deaths and building empires, trembled as he held his nephew. Leo clung to him, understanding only that his father was crying, and the understanding made his own sobs worse. "I'm sorry," Nicholas whispered into Leo's hair. "I'm so sorry I didn't see. I should have protected you. I'm your dad now and I failed you." Nora stepped forward without thinking. She placed her hand on Nicholas's back, feeling the tension there, the battleship strength of him reduced to grief. She did not speak. There were no words that fit. Outside the apartment, Enzo and Theo stood motionless in the hallway. They heard their boss crying through the door. In 15 years of service, in 15 years of watching Nicholas Castellano order men into cars that drove them to graves they would never rise from, they had never heard this sound. Enzo met Theo's eyes. Something passed between them, unspoken but clear. The world had shifted. Their boss, the man they had sworn to protect and serve, was learning to be protected and served. He was learning to need. Nora called Dr. Marconi, the family physician, and Leo was examined. No broken bones. No internal damage. The bruises would heal. But the terror lived somewhere deeper, in the places where wounds do not show on skin. After Leo had been driven home with two of Nicholas's most trusted men, after the apartment had fallen silent again, Nora and Nicholas sat on the balcony. The November air was dry and cold, carrying the smell of distant rain that would not come for weeks. "You didn't see," Nora said quietly, "because grief makes us blind." Nicholas turned to her. In the light from the city below, his face looked carved from stone. "I should have known," he said. "You're learning," Nora said. "Just like I'm learning that I survived. That I'm allowed to ask for help. That I don't have to be invisible anymore." Nicholas reached for her hand. His palm was warm despite the cold air. "You saved him," Nora continued. "The moment you looked, the moment you asked, you saved him." Nicholas did not respond. But he did not let go of her hand. 6 months later, the city had turned to spring. April came with heat that rose from the pavement in shimmering waves and flowers that bloomed in the manicured gardens of the wealthy. Nora managed the front of house at Castellano's restaurant now. She had a salary that let her breathe. A room with windows, not a converted closet. She had Emma Langford visiting every Wednesday afternoon, the girl healing under Richard's custody, under Nora's gentle attention. She had become something she had never been allowed to be: necessary, valued, safe. Sophie Langford was serving 20 years federal prison. Douglas Hale was serving 40, the evidence of his obsession meticulously compiled by federal agents who worked directly under Nicholas's information. The corrupt cops who had ignored her complaints for years had been arrested, tried, convicted. Justice had been served not quickly, but thoroughly. Systematically. The only kind that lasts. Leo had blossomed under the structure of therapy and the consistent attention of a father who had learned to see him. His bruises were ghosts now, visible only in the way he sometimes flinched at sudden movements, in the nightmares that came less frequently as months passed. He called Nora Aunt Nora and had learned to smile again, that bell-like laugh returning to his small voice. Late one evening, after the restaurant had closed and the staff had drifted home, Nicholas and Nora sat in the back booth. The one where this had all begun, on that night 6 months ago when she had stumbled through the doors with nothing but $5 and a prayer. Candlelight flickered between them, casting shadows that danced and softened everything they touched. "I've been thinking," Nicholas said, and his voice held something new, something vulnerable, about that night. "About how if your car hadn't broken down, if my convoy hadn't been on that highway, if you hadn't stumbled through that door." "But I did," Nora said, taking his hand. "You saved me," Nicholas said. "You saved Leo," Nora replied. "We saved each other," they said together, and it was the absolute truth. Nicholas pulled out a small box. Inside was a simple gold ring, nothing ostentatious, nothing that screamed wealth. Just gold, pure and understated and permanent. "I'm not asking you to forget Marcus," he said. "I'm asking if you'll build something new with me. With Leo. With whatever future we can make." Nora's eyes filled with tears, but they were good tears, the kind that heal instead of wound. "Yes," she said. Outside the window, Enzo and Theo watched. Enzo smiled, shaking his head. Theo put a hand on his friend's shoulder. "Never thought I'd see the day," Enzo said. "Sometimes," Theo replied quietly, "the most dangerous thing a man can do is let himself be saved." As the camera pulls back from the candlelit booth, pulling wider through the restaurant, the story resolves into this: Nicholas and Nora holding hands, Leo running in to hug them both, Emma arriving with her father Richard for dinner, the four of them settling at the table as a family built not from blood but from choice. From the moment one hand reached out at the right moment to change an entire life. Not just the one being saved, but the one doing the saving. Because rescue is never one direction. It's a circle. And the strongest families aren't born from circumstance. They're built from the choice to hold on when everything says to let go. If this story moved you, drop a like right now. Share it with someone who needs hope today. Subscribe because tomorrow we have another story about second chances and the kind of love that saves. Comment below, have you ever been saved by a stranger? Or have you saved someone when you least expected it? Let's talk. We wish all of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. No matter how hard life gets, remember that after the rain, the sky clears. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.